Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the program this evening, Through My Eyes with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Prof, you are welcome again to the program this evening.
Well, I'm not too sure what you are welcoming me to. You practically have to wring my neck to come in on this program today because I can't find any good news to celebrate with you or celebrate with our viewers. I mean, is it the number of graves of children they are finding in Canada who were murdered at one time? Is it what's the news coming out of South Africa? Is it the flooding in Europe? Is it what is the good news? Nothing. No good news. No good news at all. But I'm here. I'm here.
Yes, Prof, I agree with you on that point. There is a lot going on. But since you raised that, let me ask you a question here, Prof. Are we seeing an increase in, is it climate change that's the problem here? Or, or is it just because these incidents are being reported more with the prevalence of social media? People are now, everybody with a phone has become a journalist. Is that why we're getting all this information now coming out? Or is it actually because there are more?
I think it's both. In fact, all the things you want to talk about are multifactional. Um, I can't remember the last time that there was heavy flooding in Europe. There was in England. I think annually you have it in certain parts of the United Kingdom, but not as heavily in Europe as you have it now, and also in East Asia. But also the fact that the availability of the citizen journalist means that probably there is a journalist on the spot everywhere in the world. Nobody needs to fly, from, Washington or London to go and cover any event. Anybody with a phone, that includes anybody, could immediately put something on the internet, and if you monitor the internet, then you come across, But I just want us to say, oh well, it's the presence of the citizen journalist. They are multifactional.
Yes, Prof. Prof, with that, let's start with South Africa. Again, we touched on this last week, and we actually praised the government for sticking by the rule of law and going through with the imprisonment of ex-president Zuma. But now we're faced with this conundrum where the rule of law has been upheld, but now we're seeing an uprising from the people, supporters of Zuma, and some have even gone as far as saying what we're seeing now in South Africa is no more about the imprisonment of ex-president Zuma. I want to get your views on that, Prof. But before we do that, there is a particular clip that's making its round on the internet that I want to play for you and get your views on this before we start to look at that. Prof, let me play this.
We are running a constitutional democracy in South Africa, and you are practicing a very clear rule of law. There is no president, whether he wins with 2/3 majority, who can then stand up there and say, I'm now cancelling these charges. Impossible in the South African setting. What we are doing in South Africa, which people should appreciate, is that we are treating our constitutional democracy so well that no citizen of this country can be said because he or she holds certain positions cannot be tried. That's what, in fact, we are going to see. We are going to once again do something that is unprecedented in this country, wherein the president will go to court and answer questions and test the allegations against him and allow the court of law to determine whether he was guilty or not guilty. Shouldn't we be saying, once again, the democratic South Africa is showing the world what we need to do? That you don't, because you hold certain positions, then be above the law. Everybody is equal before the law. This is what I think the world should be saying. What an interesting processes that are taking place in South Africa.
Prof, how do you react to this footage that has come out regarding ex-President Zuma and what is now going on in South Africa?
Well, his words obviously have come back to haunt him. I think that that was Zuma at the hubris stage of South African development. I've met a lot of South Africans. I've interacted with, and I found this hubris, this arrogance, this ego trip characteristic of South Africans. Let me give you just one example. During the time we had a problem in Nigeria over the June 12th movement, and some of us went into exile. The Commonwealth decided, as part of its attempt at conflict resolution, brought some of us in a tripartite arrangement in London. Some of those of us who were in exile were on the platform of NADECO. Some of the Nigerian officials who obviously were there to defend the Nigerian government, and South Africans. And during the discussion, I was already getting irritated by what I regard as the arrogance of the South Africans who were there, who were involved in the discussion. But I kept my cool until one of them then said, "Look, Prof, we will be willing to come and teach Nigerians about federalism. Maybe that's what you need in Nigeria." And I said, wait 1 minute. Did I hear you right? Did I hear you right? When did you start practicing federalism in South Africa? We've been practicing federalism as a system from 1943. Or if you want, we could even go far back to Nigeria was set up in 1914 as a federal state. What do you mean? You are going to come and teach Nigerians about federalism? So I said, look, enjoy your honeymoon, because I am absolutely sure that what Nigeria is going through, you in South Africa will go through probably in another 10 years or so. Of course, the British who were there as observers quickly stepped in and said, well, let us give the Nigerians, the credit for the system that they have been practicing. But you see, because of the moral standing, the moral stature of Nelson Mandela, all South Africans believed they were Nelson Mandela. All South Africans believe that South Africa itself was an incarnation of Nelson Mandela. And that's what is evident in what Zuma was saying there, not knowing that today will come. I don't take any pleasure in saying South Africans, I told you so. What we are seeing in South Africa is Zulu nationalism complaining about how one of their own is being treated in South Africa. Mbeki is not Zulu. Nelson Mandela was not Zulu. Cyril Ramaphosa is not Zulu. And the Zulus are saying South Africa is a Zulu nation. You cannot treat one of our own this way. So that is the first operative factor in what is going on there now. On top of it, has now mounted the what South Africans, all South Africans feel about not being beneficiaries of the anti-apartheid struggle, that they were sold out at the last minute, that the deal which Mandela made with de Klerk and the white community was that the blacks will have political power provided they do not interfere with the running of the economy. In other words, economic power will stay in the hands of the white establishment. Unfortunately, the white establishment has not been clever enough to know that they needed to continue to compensate not just the black and the Indian elite with, posts here and there, while ignoring the vast majority of the black community. So the grievances driven by the poverty of the black community has now leapt on top of the Zuma supporters to now engage in the looting. But you see, watch out a little bit for the next factor I'm going to talk about, which is the effect of the pandemic. Because practically all over the world, we witnessed one pandemic phenomenon, the beginning, which was that people rushed into shops and emptied everything in the shops. I saw it manifested in the United States. I saw it manifested in England. I saw it manifested in France until the factories had to be turned up and to continue to put goods back on the shelves at a rate that was more than what they were taking out. In the case of South Africa, since they didn't have the earning power, the buying power, they resorted to looting in order to clear the shelves in the shops. So you have the pandemic phenomenon becoming another factor. So in a way, we're dealing in South Africa with almost a mini revolution or a pre-revolution manifestation. And I'm not sure we've had the last of it. They've had to call out troops because the police could not cope. And they keep increasing the number of troops that they are calling out, because really it is becoming an urban revolution that the authorities are coping with. What alarms me is also the personalization of the looting, in the sense that Cyril Ramaphosa is being called out personally, and they've gone back to Mbeki. You see, during the time when Zuma was in power, there were certain statements that came out from his supporters, which people ignored. And they were saying that Mandela, Mbeki, sold out to the white community, and even Cyril Ramaphosa, even though at that time he wasn't in government, but he had joined the business community. Remember the shooting of miners because they were demonstrating conditions of service. Cyril Ramaphosa was involved in that. So supporters of Zuma said that people like Zuma were dealt a bad hand. They were not taken care of. Only Mandela, Mbeki, and Ramaphosa were taken care of. And that therefore, now that he is president, he has to take care of himself. And that was what led him into those deals with the Gupta family in order to compensate himself. People like him who also were part of the struggle, but who were ignored when the deals were being made. So, you see, these are all the factors which are at play. One thing which I should bring to the attention of our viewers is this. I have got on my phone videos of whites being involved in the looting. You don't get BBC or the CNN or even Al Jazeera. Instead, what you get are white shopkeepers, Indian shopkeepers being interviewed. And yet, I know that again on some of the videos that I have got, even Nigerian shopkeepers, who are usually the targets of rioters and looting, have also been complaining, but they've never been interviewed. So again, the whites and the Indians are now being put out as the victims, while the blacks are the looters. Systemic racism that we talk about all the time is also being manifested on this occasion. Unless the BBC journalists, Al Jazeera journalists, CNN journalists are going to tell me that they are not aware that there are white looters also who are involved, in the looting. So, I mean, there are too many things that upset me about the South African situation. The South Africa had been made a member of BRICS. They were also always being called to G7 or G8 or what have you, simply because the Western nations wanted to portray South Africa as that shining light which they had created when they were living in Africa. And now, I don't know how they're going to cope with this.
Prof, there's a question I want to put to you before we leave the South Africa point. What does the government do now? Will releasing ex-President Zuma change anything? Should they release him, given what we're seeing on the ground now and the level of violence that we're seeing? Should they release him?
No, I don't think they should release him. Justice must run its course, irrespective of the price that the society will have to pay. If they release him, they will be sending the wrong signal that there are people who are above the law. And I don't think that would be good, not only for South Africa, that it would be good for Africa. I know, as I said earlier on, about 3 weeks ago, when we were talking about this, the United States has got away with Nixon being above the law. I mean, just about 2 weeks ago, there was a report that the billionaires and multimillionaires in America don't pay tax. And yet, if you, as a low income or medium income American, whether white or African American, if you dodge paying tax, the American IRS will come after you and you are headed for jail. But if you're a multimillionaire, a billionaire, you will get away with it. They've been getting away with it. In Britain, I don't know of any prime minister who's gone to jail for malfeasance. And some of the things they have done while they were in office. So, but I don't think that that South Africa should go and copy Britain or copy the United States in the same way. If you've been a president, you will be above the law. The next step then is government has to wait it out. Government has to wait it out. They have to bring out more troops until you bring the situation under control, and then you must have an economic package that you are going to put together to address the alienation of the blacks in South Africa economically. You must have an economic package for them, which will involve, sorry to say, which will involve the very rich in South Africa having to give over some of their privileges which they are enjoying now and which this should teach them that those privileges cannot last. You cannot, when you ignore the poor, the rich is going to have sleepless nights, and eventually the poor will come after the rich.
Prof, before we leave the region, moving away from South Africa slightly, let's go to Mozambique. One of the things that we saw earlier this week is the fact that the EU has agreed to have to send a military training mission to Mozambique. And a group of foreign ministers sat down. They decided here. What does the EU want with Mozambique, Prof? What is strategic about Mozambique to the EU?
Mozambique has a common border with South Africa. And the incursion of the jihadists into northern Mozambique is not likely to stop there. And I think the EU's probably learned their lesson that it doesn't pay them to ignore development until it has become a major issue. What that is did in North Mozambique, the people they killed, factories they blew up, and don't forget that is also the area where there is oil, petroleum. So economic interests of European countries are involved. Throw your mind back. An American training team is still in Uganda. They're training Ugandan army in order to cope with the Lord's Development Army, which had been rampaging the northern part of Uganda for a long time. So, as much as the Americans criticize Museveni for being a dictator, for his human rights deficiency, there is an American Special Forces training team in Uganda. So I'm not surprised at this decision. And it's all to make sure that they checkmate the jihadists, right there and push them back. Don't also forget that Kenya has been suffering from Al-Shabaab and the jihadists now for probably more than a decade. And there was a time when other African troops were brought in to help Kenya to checkmate, because Kenya shares common border with Somalia. So you see, in a way, you could see the movement downwards of the jihadists, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, the movement downwards from Somalia and just coming down. And invariably, they are not checkmated. They will end up in South Africa. And that will be a disaster for South Africa, a disaster for Europe, because then they're going to get refugees coming from South Africa, because most of the white people in South Africa came from Europe, and that's where they will be headed. And Europe doesn't want to have to deal with those refugees, given even the problems they've had with jihadists in Europe at this time. So it's like, making sure that they take steps to checkmate them and push back before they get to a situation where it will be a problem for Europe itself.
One of the things we've seen the EU do, Prof, this week relates to sanctions on Lebanon. And the French foreign minister described it this way. He said, Lebanon has been in self-destruct mode for several months. What is your take on the situation in Lebanon, Prof?
Do you know that Lebanon doesn't have a government now? The prime minister designate resigned today because he and the president could not agree on the structure of government. Throw your mind back to when that ship exploded in the Lebanese dock. The first foreign head of state to come visit him was Macron from France. And he promised aid, massive aid, but on one condition, that aid will not be given into government circles, and he said it openly, where he said the money will be stolen and the government will be paralyzed, that the money will actually the aid will not get to the Lebanese people who are suffering. Well, the Lebanese politicians have called this bluff. Since the government at that time resigned, they have not been able to form any government. And any prime minister designate that is nominated has never been able to form a government. See, behind the problem in Lebanon is the religious fractionalization. Under their constitution, the president must be a Christian, the prime minister must be a Sunni Muslim. That's written into their constitution, unchangeable, like the law of the Medes and the Persians. When you then have a situation where the president said, fine, but the president must nominate the Christian cabinet members. And the prime minister says, under the constitution, I accept that there must be Christian members of my cabinet, but I, as prime minister, will have to nominate them because I have to work with them. And the president says no. Then you've got a conflict right there. And since neither will give way, the prime minister today, they will have to pick another nominee. And there is no, you'll be whistling in the dark. You'll be expecting miracles if you think the president. And so I can now understand why the EU will now say, well, you, the politicians, are the troublemakers in Lebanon. You don't care whether Lebanon collapses, whether Lebanon becomes a failed state. As long as you protect your interests, you don't really care. Perhaps the way we can make you focus to get your attention is to now target you with sanctions. So if you think if Lebanon collapses, you can run away and come to Europe with all the money you have stolen, we will block you having access to that money. This will make you think twice. Thirdly, there is the Hezbollah factor, because if Lebanon collapses, the beneficiary is going to be Hezbollah, the Hezbollah militia. And the Hezbollah militia is an ally of Iran. So while Iran would then think that it would then move in with resources in order to rescue Lebanon, Israel is not going to allow that, because that will now mean Iran having the same border vicariously through Hezbollah with Israel. And that's like having Gaza, the Gaza syndrome, all over again. So Israel is not going to allow that. So this is just going to be catastrophe for poor Lebanon, all because their politicians have not the interests of Lebanon at heart. So I believe that's why the EU is calling out some of their key politicians and imposing sanctions on them.
Prof, while we're on this subject of sanctions, one nation that's been crippled by sanctions is Cuba. And of recent, people have been expecting, Cubans inclusive, that President Biden will roll back some of the sanctions that were put in place, the hardline policies that were put in place by the Trump administration. Now, this was something President Biden had talked about during his campaign, but that seems not to be happening as quickly as one would expect it to have happened. What do you have to say about the pace of that particular aspect of the Biden administration?
Look, I have had enough with President Biden and his slow motion administration. This is a straightforward matter. You were vice president under Obama when the United States opened the doors to Cuba. Even Obama went on an official visit to Cuba. You were the vice president. Are you saying you didn't sign on to that policy? And as you've mentioned, during the campaign, he promised that he will revisit the issue, because when Trump came in, not only did he reimpose the sanctions, he even tightened them. You don't need congressional approval to allow Cubans in America to send money to their relatives in Cuba. You don't need congressional approval. You don't need congressional approval to allow tourists to go back and start to visit Cuba. One of the grievances of the demonstrators, not just in Havana, but all over Cuba, was that while the Cuban government found money to build hotels for tourists, they didn't have any money to build them houses. But these hotels for tourists were built because the Obama administration, with Biden as vice president, lifted this against tourists visiting Cuba so that they will spend the money occupying the hotels, they will spend dollars buying goods and everything. It was the United States under Trump that again criminalized tourists, American tourists going to Cuba. So, yes, I know Biden has only been there for 100+ days, but you don't need rocket science to sign executive orders reintroducing palliatives for Cuba. And now Biden had the chutzpah to go on television and say, you are with the people, the government of Cuba, should not interfere with the rights of people to demonstrate and this and problems that you caused for Cuba and which you still maintain on Cuba. Trump is no longer in. We cannot continue to blame Trump for everything. I'm shocked, really. I think the Democrats made the wrong choice, picking
Wow.
Biden to run against Trump. They should have picked maybe. There was that Senator Maine. I don't remember her
Wow.
name now. And there are younger people, more active people that they could have picked. Because by the time of the 2020 elections, the Americans were in the mood for anybody but Trump. They would have voted for any Democrat. They just want Trump out. I think the Democrats made a mistake.
Prof, we will revisit that particular question, but I want to move us on to something that's also unprecedented in a sense, given the time between the communication between these two parties, and that's the call between the Turkish president and his Israeli counterpart, something that hasn't happened in a long time. Now they're talking about improving ties between those two nations. Do you see that tie they're talking about being one that's likely to last long, or is this just a flash in the pan?
Well, I have had the privilege of reading the full text, both from the Israeli side and the Turkish side, because it was telephone conversation, and what they call the readouts. And the relationship was a conditional one, in the sense that both made reference to the relationship being conditional on resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship, which to some extent showed the recognition by both Erdogan and Herzog, the Israeli president, on the fact that, yes, while they mean to have a repair of their relationship, they were also conscious of the fact that a flare-up in Gaza can derail that relationship at any time. The Erdogan of Turkey called back the Turkish ambassador when the American moved their embassy to Jerusalem, and Netanyahu proclaimed Jerusalem the eternal capital of the Jewish people. And he then asked the Israeli ambassador to leave Istanbul. So that to me would look like the first step, a return of both ambassadors. But will the Turkish ambassador go to Jerusalem, or will he go to Tel Aviv, where he was before? Two, to what extent will Turkey be allowed to supply, to make goods available for economic rehabilitation of Gaza? Three, there is the lame duck government of the Palestinian, whose president was actually in Istanbul, I think just yesterday or so. Is he going to have some influence on whatever package that both governments, Israel and Turkey, are going to put in place? When I look at all of this, I just say to myself, yes, they started dating. I don't think this will ever get to the stage of a marriage, a diplomatic marriage, not even diplomatic engagement. But talking never hurts anybody. But I don't think we should put too much emphasis on what has just taken place.
All right. Prof, let me take you back to something we've talked about in the past. I put a question to you then, which you said at your age you were not probably keen on. And this is the issue of going to space. Now we see that Richard Branson has beat other billionaires in this space race. But Prof, now they're saying that maybe trips to space might be more commonplace than one would have expected. Number one, how do you react to that? Number two, are you making plans to book your seat?
All right. If you will give me the telephone number of a millionaire who's prepared to pay for my seat, what the heck? At my age, I should still be prepared to take risks, But seriously, this space this race to space by these billionaires looks to me like billionaires playing schoolboy games that should be frowned upon, that should be condemned. Now, in the case of Branson, he has contributed money and he has endorsed atmospheric, climatic, uh, that we should take care of the earth, the damage we've done to the earth, down on carbon consumption, and we should try to repair the damage we've done to this world. And yet the amount of carbon consumed that will be released into the atmosphere by these two billionaires playing their games of going to space. I'm appalled by it. It meant Branson never really believed for 1 minute in endorsing the climatic, the efforts being made to repair the earth. Maybe he just, his heart was not in it. He said it because it sounded good. But at the end of the day, both of them are just playboys racing for space. I am appalled by it. But they are billionaires. They will get with it, and then they will turn around and tell the poor woman in the low-income countries not to cook with wood because it's burning and releasing coal smoke into the atmosphere. How dare you? How dare you? You've just spent maintenance releasing massively smoke into the atmosphere, probably setting back for, I don't know, a generation, years, or what have you, the damage that has been repaired just because you two are playing games as to who will go to space first. In any case, why are you going to space? Our history, or the history of rich industrialists who set up all these coal, all these smoke belching factories all over the world. You haven't repaired them. Who says that you are not going to go and damage space when you get there? What are you going to go there anyway? Just because you want to have the tomfoolery of looking out of a window and seeing the curvature of the earth. The same earth you are busy destroying by getting there. And then you come back. So I'm sorry that if I sound a bit too harsh on Branson and Becos, the other fellow,
Bezos.
the SpaceX founder. I'm not, again, this is where if billionaires are not controlling governments, why should government have allowed this kind of venture? For what? For what? What is going to be the contribution to the prosperity of the earth by what they are doing?
Prof, there's a question, there's a point here. Someone is saying experience and demonstration of scientific breakthroughs. We may argue that the fact that we're having some of the satellite access we have today is because some people are in space, and maybe some of these things are offsetting themselves.
Well, I concede that there is a point to the question that has been raised. But have we finished repairing the earth? Have we finished repairing the earth? Have we put in place sufficient programs to repair the earth before we start playing games with going to space? People talk about, you see, what we're not even keeping in mind. People talk about, you know, going to space, going to Mars, going to the moon. Who says that people in the moon want us? Is this not another colonization escapade? Does this sound familiar to you? Going to Africa to recolonize, to West Africa, going to India to colonize India, going to America to colonize America. Now you've finished colonizing the earth. You've made a mess of it. You now want to go to Mars. Who told you that the beings, I don't want to call them people, the beings who live in Mars want you? Who told you that Mars, the moon, that they are empty? And in any case, if they are empty, have you shown from the way you've run the business in the earth that you should be entrusted with going to colonize the moon and colonize Mars? So what are we then paying for being able to, for whatever scientific
Discovery.
privilege we get from going there? Who
Yes.
says that will bout with the damage that we will then cause when we get there?
Prof, we've run out of time, but I want to ask you this one question before we go.
You're
And
always
this,
doing that.
I would try to, to stop, but this one I cannot let go, Prof. And this is the fallout after the England-Italy game. What do you have to say to the racial fallout of that, Prof?
I'm not surprised. I feel sorry for those three young men, but I will want to tell them that just as the killing of George Floyd has, just as it led to perhaps more awareness of the need to counter racism, not just in America, but in the world. Maybe the racist abuse targeted at them will make a contribution towards being aware that there is really systemic racism in the world and not isolated incidents. We will make a mistake if we think what happened in Britain is an isolated thing. I believe that, you see, Europe has moved into a fascist stage. Right-wing governments coming into power. The government, the conservative government that you have in Britain today is a right-wing one, it's a fascist one, with even, even colored skin Asian ministers calling kneeling a political gesture, being critical of moves to bring into people's awareness the need to show anti-racism, commitment. The Prime Minister had just been forced, the British Prime Minister has just been forced to say, fine, that the British government will now think of criminalizing anti-racist messages. He was forced to do that. He wasn't interested in doing that. So, and you then look at how they push back, even in the United States. So, to me, this racism and look at anti-Semitism in Europe. I was watching a program where a rabbi in Germany, no, in France, talking about he's having to cover that skull cap that they wear so that they will not know that it's a rabbi because he was afraid of attacks on the streets of France. So we are really dealing with a massive movement that is a danger, not to blacks alone, but to humanity. I mean, after all, when Hitler finally got his hands on the levers of power in France, it was not just the Jews who suffered. It was not. And you could, of course, he led the world into a world war. So anti-racism is a manifestation of fascism, and we need to wake up and sit upright in not only condemning, but in confronting it.
Thank you for that, Prof. And just before we close, I'll leave you on this one. There's a comment here on YouTube. One of our viewers is saying that, no, we must organize to get you to space, and that we will sponsor you to get to space. Be the forerunner for us.
So I won't be able to come back and stop causing trouble.
No. So when you see those beings, you will tell them that, oh, come to Nigeria, help us out in Nigeria. Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you to our viewers this evening for being there. We'll be back again next week for another episode of this program. So thank you very much for our viewers. Thank you, Prof.
Kanga.